Good evening. We'll begin tonight's hearing examiner meeting, the hearing today, and this is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Caldwell Hearing Examiner for June 22nd, 2021. I serve in both a decision-making capacity and an advisory capacity to the Mayor and City Council. There are two types of public hearings that this Commission conducts. The first is a legislative hearing whereby we formulate recommendations on certain land use requests. My recommendations are then forwarded onward to the City Council, who makes decisions on legislative matters. The second type of public hearing is the quasi-judicial in nature, meaning that the requests are specific to a parcel of land. I am authorized to make decisions on requests for special use permits, variances, preliminary plat, time extensions, and planned unit developments that do not involve the subdivision of land. However, any decision I may make tonight is by no means final. Anyone that believes he or she has been aggrieved by my decision has the right to file an appeal to the City Council. On quasi-judicial requests that involve the subdivision of land, rezones, and annexation, I am authorized to only make recommendations to the City Council, who will make the final decision. The hearing procedures, as required by Idaho Code, are as follows. 1, staff will first present a report on the application. 2, the applicant or the applicant's representative will then present the summary of the request. 3, testimony of those in support will be taken, followed by testimony from those in neutral position, followed by those in opposition. I will allow the applicant or applicant's representative rebuttal. After the rebuttal testimony is given, public testimony is closed, and no new or oral written testimony will be allowed unless I elect to reopen testimony. The time limits for testimony are as follows. The applicant receives 10 minutes. Those in favor, neutral, opposed, receive 5 minutes, and then allow a rebuttal by the applicant of 5 minutes. I accept oral and written testimony from those in attendance, but only if you sign the sign-up sheet to speak available at the front of the room and have been sworn in. When testifying before me, you must come to the podium, state your full name and address, and acknowledge that you've been sworn in. I ask everyone to treat all parties with fairness and respect. I will not tolerate any outbursts, etc. We also ask those to please turn off your cell phone. I'm a volunteer hearing examiner and receive small compensation for my efforts. I'm charged by law to keep clear record of the proceedings, consider factual testimony, and to stay within cities and states' rules and regulations. We, the city staff, thank you for your courtesy to us and others as we move through the process. Now I'll ask staff to swear in those who intend to testify. Please stand.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Thank you. The first order of business, the approval of the minutes of the May 11, 2021 meeting that has been reviewed and approved, and the approval of the minutes for May 25th, 2020 meeting has been read and found sufficient. The next item, the old business, the action item on case ANN 21-1/PUD1 was continued from an earlier hearing, will be continued to the July 13th, 2021 hearing, the date certain. Action item 2 under old business, case number SUP 21-6 was continued to this date and will be further continued to the July 13th, 2021 hearing. And so if you we're here to testify on those two items. We won't have a hearing on that. It'll be in July. So, those are done for the night. Under the new business, the first item that we have is case number SUP 2002, Jeff Hatch, Steinberg Architecture, on behalf of Venus Development, is requesting a special use permit for traditional mini storage consisting of 6-story structures, landscaping, and an office on approximately 5.4 acres of a 16.5-acre parcel. located on the west side of Middleton Road, approximately 460 feet south of the intersection of Houston and Middleton Roads, Caldwell, Idaho. The subject property is in the C3 zone, surface commercial. With that, I'll turn the time over to the staff to make the presentation case.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Debbie Root, Senior Planner, 621 Cleveland Boulevard, and I have been sworn.
Thank you.
As indicated in the opening legal, the applicant is requesting a special use permit for a mini storage facility on the west side of Middleton Road on approximately 4.5 acres of a 16.4 acre parcel. This application was held up to allow for time to complete a required portion of a development agreement on the northern boundary of the property. And so we're back here at this time to actually hear the application. An additional neighborhood meeting was conducted to comply with the ordinance requirements, given the duration of the delay in order to allow for the annexation of the 8 acres in the northern corner of the property. There are, in this case, the property is zoned C3 service commercial, which mini storage is an allowed use by conditional use permit or special use permit in the C3 zone. The property is also located in the APO1 airport land use limitation zone, which restricts the property's use to specific uses that are not noise sensitive and are not residential. And so the entirety of the property lies within that APO1 land use limitation zone, overlay zone in this area. There also key lock storage is located across the Middleton Road from this property, so there is already storage in the area. And also an additional permit for Ustic Storage LLC is approved, and the building permits are approved for that storage facility. No buildings are constructed at this time, but it is under development as a storage facility on the east side of Middleton Road at this location as well. There are a few issues with the site plan as proposed, and we have had multiple revisions of the site plan and have not completely gotten a drawing that's satisfactory to staff to meet all of the requirements of the ordinance. There is a 15-foot differing land use buffer required along the south property boundary that is not shown on the landscape plan, nor is it shown on the site plan. Also, the staff would like to see the emergency access, no public access permitted, labeled more clearly, other than it is identified in the notes and with a number on the site plan, but we'd like to see that labeled more clearly. And we'd like to see dimensions on the road right-of-way dedication, the street landscape buffers that are there, so that we know that the actual site plan is depicting what is required of the ordinance in there. There's also mention in the project letter that they were intending to do zero-scaping along much of that frontage landscaping in that 25-foot landscape buffer, which is not allowed along there. That shall be living landscape, for that, not xeriscaping, and must comply with the City of Caldwell's landscape ordinance for this corridor landscape buffer. The site plan proposes that there are 2 open canopies along the south boundary, which, would be storage, I assume, for cars and RVs and things, and staff would like that to be site obscured, preferably with an enhanced fence, so that the Middleton traffic along our corridor there is not having to view all of those open-faced, storage facilities, as well as possibly enhancing the landscaping and the differing land use buffer to further mask that site visual impact to the traveling public and the residential uses that are to the southeast of it. On this site plan, there is a future project building shown that required a traffic impact study, which would have further delayed the, hearing on the mini storage facility, and they chose to separate that project from the mini storage and come forth with this plan. So the future building is not under consideration on this application at this time. Again, some of the site plans don't clearly depict the access points as being an emergency access only, and where the actual, facility access will be. I'd like that to be more clearly depicted on drawings that are in the file. They did provide early on, and again, this was nearly a year ago, some elevations of the buildings, which provide some nice frontages. They don't look just like a storage building, and we have expectations that that is and will be the case, that it doesn't look like your traditional mini storage metal front that's fronting our corridor roadway on that. With that, the plans are conditioned in the conditions of approval to reflect the request by staff to meet what's been asked of them. Engineering has asked that the corridor plan, Middleton Road corridor plan, be overlaid on there, the line work, and we're still not seeing that, to my knowledge, with what's been provided to us. These things will have to be completed prior to any building permits actually being issued, and that's why staff chose to proceed to bring this to the hearing examiner at this time. Not ideal situation, we'd have liked to have those completed, and, but we're not getting everything that we need when we're asking for it, and so we move forward. But again, no permits will be issued without those being completed as we would like to see them. The staff has been given some directive by council that they don't want to see storage on our main corridors, but again, it's a use that is permitted by special use permit in the zone, and there are not any circumstances other than that there is potentially going to be a glut of storage in one single location at this project site in the future or now, and so on the fence whether to deny or approve as far as the storage units go. We do have opposition from the operators of both Key Lock Storage and U6 Storage LLC. And we did receive a late exhibit labeled PR3 that was provided to you just prior to this hearing, and, is not currently part of the public record, so should be read into the record. I will stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Root. I will read this, letter from Music Storage LLC, into the record. In fact, I will summarize it and quote, part of it. It can be characterized as, being in opposition to that. This is the property owner and project owner of the, project directly across the street from this, proposal. And they're in the process now of developing that. We'll read the, second page, and this is, by the way, labeled as late exhibit PR3, and from Delta Horst-Miller, the owner of Houston Storage LLC. The next last paragraph reads, my appeal to the hearing examiner in the City of Caldwell Planning and Zoning is to hold or deny the approval of this project at this specific location, and further evaluate and determine the usage of additional storage to the City of Caldwell as a whole, elsewhere, but not such a confined, impacted, and centralized small area, namely the corner of Ustick Middleton Road. And that is their central point here, and we'll enter that as part of the record. I should note there also in the record there is a similar letter from the owner of the in situ storage across the street with some real interesting data about the storage uses. Now, Mr. Reed, I did have several questions concerning the application. Now, you pointed out several items that have not been addressed here. One being the cross-access to properties to the west across this property. That's something that we have a future proposal here, which I have a question about, but the nature of these kinds of things, and you might think of it as the, the foot in the door kind of situation where the city is looking at this cross-access agreement with properties to the west, and my experience tells me that this is the time to secure that as opposed to some future time, and be real clear about that. I'm not seeing that on the plan, on the plat, well, there's no plat, but on the plan itself. And Mr. would consider that an essential part of this application to, or maybe for the city engineer, to acquire this cross-access agreement with the properties to the west.
That is correct. I believe that's addressed in the engineering memo PA2 for the requirements of the project to provide for access to all properties surrounding this, that there be cross-access agreements with the understanding that Ustick Road and Middleton Road, which are both arterial and corridor roadways, have very restrictive access points. And so for the city's planning purposes, those properties, we need to ensure that all the properties have adequate access, through access, including our emergency services, to these properties in these two locations where Middleton and Ustick have restricted access.
Hey, Ms. Root, city engineer, do you have you embellish on that point, the necessity for this cross-access to the properties to the west?
Yeah, Mr. Hearing Examiner, TJ Franz, City of Caldwell Engineering Department, 621 Cleveland Boulevard, and I acknowledge I've been sworn in. So I think Mr. covered it pretty well. With the restrictive access, for Ustick Road and Middleton Road corridors. It's gonna make it very hard for traffic to be able to flow through that area if we don't have cross access between these parcels, to get in and out of there with proposed raised medians that are already adopted and planned for Middleton Road, and that will more than likely show up on the Ustick Road corridor policy when it's done. I would just further add that City Council's already adopted the Middleton Road corridor policy. So that's an established document that we have to follow as far as access along Middleton Road. And when they adopted that, they actually adopted the access management section of that policy for Ustick Road. And so we do have very specific guidelines we have to follow. And one of the highly recommended portions of the access management portion of that document is to obtain and provide cross-access through the parcels that front both of those roads. And so really what we're trying to do is just make sure that we're retaining the integrity of our roadway system for all of the vehicles and motorists in that area.
Thank you, Mr. France. Now, let's, delve into that a little bit more. The property, or that cross-access could occur at various parts of this property, east-west cross-access agreement. Now, do you have a specific recommendation or location for that to satisfy the Middleton plan, the Ustick corridor plans?
So we worked with Mr. Hatch as far as establishing the access to the north of this property that's not, it's depicted here on the site plan, and that location would be acceptable. And we've also already discussed the primary access point that's shown for this current application. And the way that they are depicting what they call out as the common access driveway for the future project area, where those two east-west running common access drives more or less run into that western property would actually work pretty well. That would provide pretty good cross-access. So I think if they proceeded and didn't change that and kept those in the same general location, that would suffice.
And to go a little deeper, are we looking for a right-of-way, a private road, or something of that nature, a dedication, a right-of-way to fulfill this concept in the corridor plan?
Yeah, it wouldn't be necessarily a dedication of right-of-way and the construction of a public roadway, but we would be looking for a recorded cross-access easement across that property, allowing neighboring parcels to utilize that cross-access easement.
Okay, now I'm looking at Exhibit 3.1, the sheet A 1.0 in their application, where it shows future project and shows, looks like some kind of circular driveway around the proposed future project. It's very dimly reproduced here, and I can't tell for sure if that proposed access is part of this project or part of the future project or both. Could you elucidate me on that?
My understanding, and Mr. Hatch may be able to explain that a little bit better through his design. My understanding, judging by where the property lines are shown, is that the width of the access is actually a portion of this project, and then it kind of makes a slight angle north, and that common access drive looks like it splits the property line more or less. That's my understanding. So this parcel should have its own access, not being taken from a separate parcel, the future project parcel at this point. But the common access loop drive seems like it's splitting two parcels, the way it's depicted.
And it also seems depicted, Mr. France, that there may or may not be adjacency to western property boundary, looking kind of like a protection strip situation. Does this fulfill that, condition that you're looking for to have that cross access, or it seems pretty sketchy, and I'm not seeing the detail that I need to, make some kind of decision about that.
Yeah, so the site plan does not clearly depict cross-access to the western property right now. It shows it being circulated interior. So I would say it doesn't clearly meet the requirements for that cross-access to the parcel to the west, the way that it's drawn right now.
Thank you. You know, the second part, I'd like to just have a discussion about this future project. I'm a little wary of, you know, moving to a future project in this type of proposal. I'm very appreciative of the fact that we have some understanding of what that future development might be. That's crucial to decision making. But I sort of worry about the imprimatur of approving this portion of it and implying approval of the future project. I want to clarify that this, just for the record, and this is maybe for Debbie or Ms. Root, that you made it clear that this is not, the future project is not part of the current proposal, but I would like to disassociate the two until we have a proposal for the future project. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, that is correct. So at the time when the annexation to the north was pretty much getting completed, the applicant had determined that, and staff thought they probably could too, was to combine these two, add this future project to this application and go through it as one hearing. When we got the site plan and I went to engineering with the site plan, it was identified that because of the size of the warehouse storage, that size requires that a traffic impact study be completed. The applicants did not want to wait until that traffic impact study was completed in order to move forward with the mini storage, and therefore chose to remove the future project building from the hearing application, and therefore it is not under consideration tonight, and it may not be that structure in the future. It may be some other business opportunity that Venus Development or some other property owner at that time chooses to bring forth to hearing. If they choose to come forward with the proposed future project building that warehouse storage, it will require an additional special use permit, so it does have to come back before the hearing bodies to be considered on the property in the C3 zone as proposed. And it does, as proposed, require a traffic impact study be completed prior to that application coming forward.
Thank you very much. I'm really concerned about this ingress-egress issue. I don't feel like it's clearly demarcated on this plan, and but we'll talk about that later. Now, on to the landscaping. They proposed xeriscape, which is not acceptable. There's some lack of proposal in landscaping on the southern property boundary to essentially obscure the open storage area. These are issues that are crucial to this particular kind of use, because the public view of this property is paramount to its success and as far as being a good proposal and fitting into the urban landscape. Ms. Reed, would you consider this the landscape plan incomplete?
I do consider the landscape plan incomplete.
Thank you. Okay, I think, we'll probably come back to staff with some more questions. At this time, I'd like to, ask the applicant please to make their presentation.
Good evening, Jeff Hatch, our address is 200 West 36th Street, Boise, Idaho, 83714. I acknowledge I've been sworn in.
Thank you, Mr. Hatch, you may proceed.
Good evening, Plans Examiner, thank you for consideration of our special use permit today. About a year and a half ago, we started this application process, and about a year ago submitted an application. At that time, found that we had to do the annexation process, which has led this application to be tabled until today. Most of the comments that we've reviewed and discussed with staff, we feel can be achieved in working as those items being conditioned. We are currently working on kind of a similar landscape concern along the highway on a self-storage facility, which we've been working with staff since October of last year on, to make sure that it's properly maintained and looking at not only, proposed uses, but also how that construction is being developed over time. Applying it back to this site, the roundabout there on the intersection has been, something that's evolved over the last 2-3 years. And is now finally to a point where it's fairly well defined and dialed in. So, for perspective, we worked on U6 storage. We got that approved based on kind of similar level of definition as shown here, and then had to work with staff at a permit level to adjust access points. And through that process, we really gained a lot of perspective of what the access points need to be on the side of USIC and Middleton, and how that's going to function cohesively, properties to the east and properties to the west. And so, with that insight, our proposed project today really is focused on recreational storage. We have plenty of mini storage with QLOC and with USIC, and traditional mini storage as far as enclosed storage. And so the intent of this project and Venus's development is for recreational storage, which are kind of canopy style, which we have 4 canopies, and larger units that are intended for RVs, they're intended for boats and ATVs, and things that are quite a bit bigger than your traditional mini stores that you would see across the street. So the intent with their market analysis versus USIG versus QLOC is to find where the market trend is lacking, and really try to maximize on what this area has in store. So we have kind of an ocean of residential development to the north, to the east, south of us, even up on USIC and Middleton, new development right there on the northeast corner. We have another subdivision on Middleton and Midland as well. So there's a substantial amount of residential subdivisions in the area, which helps constitute the proposed recreational storage. So, in talking about the access points on the east on Middleton Road, we worked with TJ and with Rob very specifically. This property's been surveyed. That access point, or common access point, has been surveyed, and that is directly across, intended to be directly across from QLOC storage, both from a function of safety and visibility, but also in coordination with the engineering staff. Much the same, the far northern access point as proposed on Middleton Road aligns with the access that's proposed directly east intended for kind of a C-store, gas station, and then a retail development that is proposed on that parcel. So the intended access points on the east would be very much set in stone and surveyed. As far as the comments and conditions for the access to the west, we found that having that as a condition of approval is something that has to be maintained with this property is agreeable. That's something that the property owner finds appropriate. The consideration right now is we're putting our access on that common access drive on the west to optimize potential for that access point to move or be adjusted as the development to the west is built out. We don't know what that is. Currently it's farmland, certainly not owned by us, and we don't have control over that development at this time. So to optimize the intent of engineering staff and city staff's request for that common access driver potential thereof, we've tried to maximize the availability for access to the west as that condition of approval. The other consideration with this is the APO1 zone implementations. We can't really do a lot of, we can't do anything residential with fairly limited amount of intended uses. And so looking at this as a recreational storage facility site, we're really trying to keep that as something that is concretely a proposed portion of that overall property that we feel is appropriate for market need. That as this development expands to the north, we found that warehouse storage and other types of industries would be more appropriate. I'm not saying that that would be the end-all be-all proposed project. We've had some discussions with like a D&B and having something of that nature out there as well. And we feel that the common access drive as we have set it up would work really well for those types of developments as well as the warehouse development. As far as the landscaping plan goes, I think we're in agreement with staff's comments and considerations. As far as xeriscaping goes, I'm looking at our proposed plant selection. We have Freeman maples, sky cones, thunder clouds, which are all types of trees that require drought-respected water, but they're certainly not xeriscaped. So I think as far as the frontage goes, we can certainly work with staff to clarify their intent. In many cases, in these corridors, similar to what we're dialoguing with staff on the highway, there's a shift in trying to really scrutinize landscaping in Caldwell and maintain an expectation moving forward that's the higher standard that we've seen in the past, and potentially even compared to what we have on the eastern side of Middleton, which I think is as we grow as a city, is appropriate to try to maintain a higher quality standard of living on these kind of primary corridors and drives. So with that, the considerations for the enhanced landscape buffer on the south is something we're also in agreement with, and we feel we can work with staff to address. Originally, about 12 months ago, we had something that was kind of more traditional to key lock and use stick storage developments to the east. And staff really challenged us to come back and say, we really want you to focus on trying to develop a frontage that has more of a pedestrian feel, more of a presence that would be engaging to the street, and something that over time has, if anything, maybe more of a retail feel. So we feel that the revisions and proposed elevations that we bring forth today are something that have quite a bit more substance, quite a bit more glazing than what you would see across the street. And with that, we feel like the applicant is really trying to want to make sure that we're meeting the intent and expectation of the city's aesthetic, presentation and using good quality products to be able to achieve that. Next slide. With that, our concept rendering here kind of shows again a little bit of that, pedestrian, connectivity. We're also proposing, since, we still have a fair amount of rural area out there, and it's kind of nice from a historic context, have some sort of public art piece, or, an old tractor from this farm site, that we could kind of have some historic context kind of bring to this area as well, in case the general public, not only from, a commercial standpoint, but also from an art and historic context standpoint. So that was kind of the intent of this image, was to kind of engage that dialogue a little bit. So I guess in summary, the applicant has worked fairly diligently to try to make a unique selection of the type of stores that they're selecting, something that isn't in competition with the neighbors. I found that the comments and feedback from both our neighborhood meeting and also from the letters that you received from U-Stick Storage and Key Lock are really concerned about the traditional storage, mini storage concern, because that's what they have. And so the farther away we are from that product, the more we can respond to their concerns and their needs to try to maintain that market. So we felt that we would be a more respected neighbor to oblige that concern and continue in the recreational storage area. As far as the concerns for landscaping and coordination, we feel that we can work with staff to achieve those prior to issue a building permit. As far as the cross-access agreements, those to be conditions of approval we find to be agreeable. And if there is a specific location on the west that is needed, we can certainly consider that, but we would encourage the consideration to have a requirement that that access be to the west. But where we have basically almost the entire western side of the property with that common access drive, we're really trying to optimize the potential in the future that if we condition that access must be provided, we can stub a location to that based on engineering requirements, but really trying to optimize flexibility so we're not restricting property to the west. And then as far as the property access points to the east, we feel those are pretty much set in stone at this time based on the roundabout and working with engineering staff. With that, I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hatch. I do have a number of questions. Trying to go through the same questions that I asked of staff. The future use on here plays a prominent part of this application, and I find that somewhat confusing. And there's a number of issues with that. One, they're portrayed what seemingly is a lot split. Something has not occurred, it's all one property. The circulation through there is a site-wide circulation, but doesn't really nail it down. There is the implication that the access road, or the so-called cross-access agreement is still sort of part of the future proposal. Would you address that a little bit, please?
As far as
The cross-access agreement, it seems to be part of the future application, and are you drawing a boundary here? And how defined is that cross-access easement or agreement?
What we typically see is that we are required to have the access points on the east and the west, or condition that provide an access point or north and south on the east, and then condition to have the access point on the west. From there, we would typically have in that agreement cross access, when those parcels are split. But for the time being, that it's all one parcel, we would just be agreeing to the access point on the east, on the north, east on the south, and then having to provide connectivity to the west. That would be, most relevant to this application, since there are no parcel splits taking place at this time. I know, speaking from experience on the eastern property, there wasn't any requirements for cross-access agreement, but we did work with that developer to come up with concepts for what they wanted to do with the balance of that entire parcel to establish potential access point connectivity. And we were able to do that. We were able to go back to engineering, and they fine-tuned those access points to what was appropriate during the permitting stage. And so, I would assume that the accesses that you have concerns about would be established during the lot split, or they would definitely be resolved during the permitting stage as they were to the east.
And Mr. Hash, that's the issue I'm having trouble with. You have an instrument in this application that defines specifically that cross-access agreement. Have you attached, that type of agreement in this application?
An instrument number for recorded access for a road that hasn't taken place yet? For
Well,
access to a property?
It's just not really clear to me. Is this drawing up on the screen right now, is that the sole, demonstration of that cross-access agreement?
The access point to the far northeast and the far southeast would be defined access points. The intent of having an access point to the west would also be defined. From there, we'd be working with engineering staff and the future proposed development to the north to establish how that common access is actually routed.
Okay, moving on, as far as you mentioned, lot split pending, that would separate, this proposal from the rest of the property. Is that stated in the application?
This application is specifically just for the special use permits based on the proposed, future projects, be it this warehouse or D&B or any type of development to the north. We would then be proposing that lot split based on that intended use. But this time, we wanted to come up with something that was fairly well thought out and defined as far as what a potential lot split would look like. But we may have, an application come through that really demands us to just be split into 2 lots instead of 3. That's yet to be determined, which is why there is no proposed lot split at this time.
Okay, thank you. Seems to be an issue, again, the access, the emergency access, designation. Could you just tell me the purpose of that emergency access and clarify the designation on the proposal there?
Yeah, keynote number 9 on the site plan identifies as emergency access, which implies that it's not a public access. We can certainly indicate on that keynote that it is not a public access. But, per the building code, any, type of square footage of this nature requires 2 access points by fire engine. So that second access is for an ingress or egress by emergency vehicles only.
Okay, and, the staff mentioned that should be more clearly defined on your plan. Yeah, I'm looking for that kind of information, and on to the building on the south, staff has indicated that, there should be a 15-foot landscape buffer there. That doesn't seem to be clearly shown. It's hard to tell the scale of this, but I'm assuming they're implying that you have to move that building 15 or some number of feet north to accommodate that landscape area. Is that correct?
Right now, the setback off of that southern property line is 10 feet, so we would be moving it 5 feet north.
Okay, that is still an unresolved issue here. This might be for staff, but if there's a parcel boundary drawn on the northern side of the open storage, would that too require that type of 15-foot landscape buffer?
We're proposing a boundary
Where your road is located there, would there have to be a buffer there as well? That's just for staff, Ms. Rudy.
Mr. Hearing Examiner, at this time, the property is all one 16-acre parcel, so there is no differing land use, property line there to make that buffer. But what has come forward with this proposal tonight is that they're proposing additional canopy or open storage along that northern boundary at this point, which is not what is included on the plans that we currently have in the case file. So we were not aware that those two would be canopy buildings along that north boundary of the 5 acres or 4.5 acres. So in the fencing ordinance, portion of our deal, basically, this type of storage, open storage and mini storage would require a site obscuring fence at the minimum along that boundary as well, to obscure that open storage that they're proposing under those canopies that would then be visible to the traveling public on Middleton Road from the traveling southbound versus just the northbound and the northbound or southeast residents. Now you've got northeast residents and traveling public that are still viewing those parked RV recreational storage. Aesthetically, it's not pleasing. And so the fencing ordinance requires at the very least site obscuring fencing, and potentially landscaping is the appropriate way to further mask that.
Thank you, Ms. Root. And Mr. Hatch, the point is, and I thought it was just, the print was too small for me to read on that, but I did note that there seemed to be a change of their proposal as far as the northern tier of this open storage that was originally proposed as closed storage.
As clarification, if you go to our elevation, not the written elevation, you'll see that proposed canopy is a tree-sided canopy. So it is viewed from the east, the south, and the west as a structure, like any other enclosed structure, but it would be open on the northern side. And it is a tree-walled canopy. And so this is not a canopy that would need obscuring besides that 15-foot landscape buffer, because it looks like a structure like any other structure. There's no open, visible ability from the south to see into this development, and it's actually creating security for this space. Much the same on the north, those would also be tree-sided canopies. If you go to, I think it was the other rendering that we have.
The one that was on my side? Okay.
It also shows that that is a three-sided canopy, like the intent there. We're in agreement with the landscape buffer request, and as far as the proposed fencing, we we'd be using the building itself as that fencing, so that it would exceed the intent.
So, Mr. Rush, to clarify, I didn't see originally in that northern tier of structures, that being a canopy. You know, I find this, a little bit confusing, you know, and it's hard, and renderings are not exactly, technical drawings. And, they may or may not show the reality of it. So I don't think that resource is adequate to portray the use here. Is there anywhere in the text, or is it labeled anywhere, in your site plans, is that being a canopy?
The site plan is labeled as canopy.
Yeah, the northern tier, structures, my assumption was that those are closed, coming in. Could you disabuse me of that notion?
I don't know what disabuse means.
Well, can you explain, it's not clear to me that that's an open canopy anywhere in this proposal. Is there, did I miss something?
The term canopy implies that it has an opening of some sort, it's not a fully enclosed building.
Okay, that's just another point of clarity that I'm struggling with. Okay,
So, Mr. Hearing Examiner, I guess what I'm unclear on is that if Mr. Hatch provided us a new drawing that depicted those northern structures as canopies, we did not clearly get it into the staff report as that. The southern ones were indicated as canopies, but I saw nowhere in the documentation that indicated they were three-sided, you know, enclosed or basically closed off from the exterior boundaries of that, project development. And I guess that's where we're struggling with this, is that the documentation isn't clearly stating that those were three-sided structures, and that also that the site plans and the drawings that we have indicate that the buildings on the north, the two structures on the north side of that 4.5 acres, say buildings, and so do the floor plans say buildings, and then there's a floor plan that has canopy. So, it's just that the documentation, what you presented on your slide set, is not what we have in the staff file. That's part of the uncertainty of this.
thank you, Ms. Reed. I have a couple more questions. Just the landscape in general, it's very unclear to me that it's meeting the ordinance, that it's adequate. Do you have a revised landscape plan, or are you sticking with what we have in front of us?
We're in agreement with staff's recommendations and conditions, and we'll revise the landscape plan accordingly.
Well, my concern is that, as I mentioned in conversation with Ms. Ruth, that the appearance of this use is tantamount to its success integrating in the urban environment. And I find it very vague, what you're proposing here. What is the citizen going to see driving by there? And it's probably more so than a lot of other uses, because there's, essentially they're garages, and, these big garages there. I'm not seeing a real clear statement on the landscape, particularly on the perimeters. So we have in front of us. The next topic, part of this is, this type of, use, there's, assuming that there is residential uses, say to the south or to, across the street, there's hours of operation. Is there a discussion of hours of operation? Part of this is a fairly typical thing that we look at for special use permits.
Great question. So the office hours would be more of a traditional, timeframe, and then actual access to facilities typically, 24 hours.
Okay, is that in the application? I didn't see that either.
I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you. And then one more question is quite typical of this. We do have lighting standards. I didn't see a discussion in, perhaps there's some, part of the problem I have is I get these drawings that are impossible to read. And it's very, very hard for me to evaluate that. But do you have a lighting plan with this?
At this time, we do not have a lighting plan.
Okay, that's again a fairly crucial feature because these tend to be lit because you have 24/7 access. And this can be an aspect that would intrude off site. And that does concern us, trying to contain the lighting on site. And yet there may or may not be issues with the airport. I don't think there would be, but that's just another aspect of this. That there should not be interference with the airport. And then to address kind of the issues from the neighboring businesses, did you do, you or someone associated with the project do the due diligence on the viability of this use in this location?
I cannot speak to that, I'm the architect. The applicant is here.
Okay.
To address that more appropriately.
I'd be interested in that. That is all the questions I had. I thank you for your testimony, and we will get to the others in attendance who signed up. Thank you, Mr. Hatch. Appreciate it. I do have signed up, is it Jerry Dickerson?
I am signed up not to speak.
Okay. I'll go with that. So the applicant is an attendant, or the owner?
Yeah, Greg Fernie. I think I signed up first.
Right, okay. Mr. Fernie, please present your testimony.
Thank you. Greg Fernie, I was sworn in earlier. My address is 4549 North Mackenzie Lane in Boise. And again, I acknowledge I've been sworn in. So, I'm more than happy to address and answer any questions that Mr. Hearing Examiner has. I'm very familiar with the area in terms of the feasibility. I grew up in Caldwell, I was born here, so I know this area extremely well. I do have a separate self-storage that is on north side in Nampa that was opened last year. And we have two more in development, one in Meridian and one in Eagle. So our process when we go through is, obviously, we're doing this because we'd like to make a profit and have a successful business. So the first thing that we do is the feasibility study to see whether or not a particular location will support what it is that we're hoping to accomplish. And in this case right here, the feasibility study came back just fine, and that's why we're moving forward and asking for the special use permit. We're very aware that we've got key lock next to us, as well as U6 storage, but we do have a number of differences, and again, I think that there are a couple of niche markets that we're going to be able to address. Likewise, they are as well. My understanding with U6 storage is that they're going to have some storage condos and things that are going to be different and unique, which due to the association, agreements that prohibit people from parking, different vehicles. Certainly just the American way of life, it seems like people accumulate things, you have businesses that need to have access to storage. A lot of people now do internet businesses, so that they have products that are coming in and they need a place to have it to go. So we really feel that, as far as the location, it's an ideal location, for a number of reasons. Number two, as far as any of the airport and the lighting issue, typically at night, what will happen is we will have only every other row that will have a dimmed lighting. That way people, when they come in, there's still an ability to see, but it is not, any type of, full-on lighting, and it doesn't create any kind of light pollution or any issues, in this location in particular. We will, adapt to anything that the, airport, requires, but again, our plan is that it's going to be dimly lighted, and it's going to be only every other row that would actually have those, probably posted on the corners. So I think that would alleviate any concern there. As far as the landscaping, certainly this process is, as the hearing examiner is aware, we had the development agreement issue with the annexation. So it's been about almost a 2-year process. And I know things have changed, and we've had COVID and a number of different things that have impacted that. That being the case, I've really appreciated staff. I bet we've had dozens and dozens of emails. I've come in a number of times, to meet with Debbie, to come in and try to, make sure that we're on track and so on and so forth. Any issues that we have with the landscaping, we're more than happy to address. We will not do the xeriscape. Certainly we can have the living landscape. Again, my family lives here, my aunts and uncles, my relatives, you name it. I will always to look good. And so whatever product I put out is going to be top notch. I think, again, the Renaissance and just everything here in terms of the downtown and in terms of people building, it's just quite impressive, and so I would definitely continue that tradition. My uncle has done a number of things there, and I know that he does just a top-notch job, and has been very instrumental in the downtown revitalization. And so he's somebody that I'm definitely going to be bringing in once we have the remaining 11 acres to develop. And I apologize if we've created any confusion by putting the cold food storage. There was perhaps the idea of killing 2 birds with 1 stone in terms of having just one hearing. But in hindsight, that being 2020, certainly I think that we did the smart thing in disconnecting at this point right here, not least of which we will come through and do a traffic study for all of the different proposed ideas that we have for the remaining 11 acres. But for the 5.4, certainly I believe it's going to be a very good, long-lasting project that in 30 years' time is going to meet the time test. It's going to be something that people are going to very much enjoy in terms of just the pleasing nature of how it actually looks, and it's not going to be a distraction whatsoever, and I think it'll be far exceed anything that we've seen actually in the area. So that is my full intention, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Forney. I do have a couple of questions. Given your all-in commitment on this project, there's a definite lack of clarity as to what is in front of us right now. I mean, we have to go by the record that we have. I went over this numerous times in the last few days and tried to, get at these issues. There should be, 4-star up front, very clear on all these aspects. And there's a complication with the future use that I brought up before, but that's the problem I'm having. It's just not clear what we're looking at here. But I do have a question, several. One, will you be the person, or you'll be the one supervising or you're the person in charge as far as the operation, how that's going to work.
Correct. So what I've done is I have a management team, that I have, hired in terms of the actual operations that they have, over 60 years of combined of running a particular operation. We have a very good example of one that is open there, again, on Northside Boulevard. We go under, Guardian Space Storage. I have a top-notch builder, Forge. They do most of the building in the area, and they just do a fantastic job. It's just high quality. As an example, the last one, when we did our walkthrough, I've had more issues in terms of doing a walkthrough of a home, in terms of, maybe some paint being chipped or something like that. They just did a very, very quality job. So, I apologize if the clarity wasn't there. Certainly, Mr. Hatch and I will go back and, that will be remedied, as well as working with staff and, with the city engineer. But with the access, as can be seen, certainly we're gonna wanna have those two access points which meet up, with the property to the east, and that was always discussed from day one, as well as the fact that we're going to need that in terms of developing the 11 acres as well. So those are gonna be very well defined as well as well constructed, because, that is only going to enhance, the developments that we're gonna be doing to the north of the storage.
Now, as far as the type of operation, you'll have personnel there all the time,
Correct.
and,
Yeah, full-time.
yeah. So your office hours will be 24/7.
No, office hours in the sense, we have them 9 to 5. And, we originally started out with 6 days a week. It's now down to 7 because of the demand, where we are. I don't know if we'll do 7 days a week here, but I do anticipate a Monday through Saturday, 9 to 5. And then people do have access because they may want to go camping or hiking, or maybe they've left some of their equipment or, something from work or whatever it is they need to access, and they have access to a gate. As the hearing examiner is probably, very well aware, usually, almost without fail, storage makes a very good neighbor because it's not high traffic. And certainly too, it typically goes against the flow of what would be your morning and your evening traffic, because people would access throughout the day or on off hours. So I think it's very complementary when it comes to any kind of a traffic, burden. But that would be the intention.
And then one more question, Mr. Fournier. You've been in the business. I'm just curious, if you had any issues with, let's call them, non-allowed uses within, this type of structure, this type of business?
Fortunately, knock on wood, so far not. And probably the biggest issue that we had is we tell people, we have it in the agreement, do not put food in any kind of a unit, because that only tends to attract mice. But as far as any illicit drugs or anything like that, no, we have not fortunately had any type of issue, like that. We're very vigilant, and certainly if we were to have any inclination or indication that somebody was doing something untoward, they would be immediately evicted, and certainly the authorities would be called.
And, one of the concerns I've seen is, these sometimes become, contractor offices or locations for that type of use. Would these units be equipped with, I guess, power and?
They're not.
Okay.
No.
And is that an issue for operations that you have?
So far, that has not been an issue, because these are not, intended in any way to replace having an office or having your own, like mini warehouse or anything of that nature. These are purely intended to store supplies, inventory, certainly items from people's homes. One of the things that I'm, proud of on Northside is we have 20% in climate control. And so that means we keep it at a set temperature year round. and those have been extremely popular, in terms of, being rented out. And it makes a lot of sense, so that means if you have a medical business, if you're a dentist, let's say you have a piano or something to that effect that you need to store, artwork, certainly that, is something that's been really, really nice to have. To my knowledge, really that's more in Ada County, and I think that that's just more of a shift, to the taste, the demographics that are moving into the area that are demanding and requiring those kind of amenities. And that first office that we have, again, my anticipation is that we would have some of the climate control right there, where again, it's gonna look like a regular business in the sense that it could be a dentist's office or something to that effect, or an architect's office or a lawyer's office. It's gonna look very, very nice, and certainly the canopy that was discussed is going to be three-sided, so there's not gonna be any view where somebody's looking in, they're just looking straight through and they can see just, out in plain view. That's not the intention whatsoever, and that wasn't properly communicated, I apologize for that. But, again, the outside, when people are looking through, when they're driving on Middleton Road, they would be very hard pressed to know what exactly was there. And when they see the outside here, that they really wouldn't have an indication that it's, traditional storage or storage in general. I think that it's going to have a very pleasing effect, in the community and certainly on that corridor.
Just one more question. Did you see the letter from Mr. Connor Skeen, the owner of the facility across the road? He has some interesting data here as far as he boiled this down to radii of square foot per capita. Is there some kind of industry standard that, or at least investment standard that you look at, where, they're talking about the square footage of storage per capita for a given region? Is this a metric that you use?
That is correct. That would be a metric that I would look at. I respectfully am not sure after I looked at his data, and certainly I think he included as well the warehouse, which was intended for something completely different, not storage. It was for a completely different business.
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, there are data points. I would say Idaho, for example, has a higher per capita use of storage than other locations. So it's very geography specific. So if I was putting something in Kansas, I wouldn't rely on data points from Idaho. Likewise, vice versa. But I think when you look at it, we're well within that. Again, I would not be here if I thought that we were not within the data points, because certainly I intend to have a successful business, and I'm relying upon what we have done, and we've been very thorough in terms of our analysis.
Okay, and then a similar question I put to Mr. Hatch and staff as far as the future use. I really hate mixing this proposal with the future proposal, and it's not really clear one begins and one ends. And I understand that your concern was just the time that it would take to do a traffic impact study for the future proposal that left that out of this application. Is that true?
That is correct. When that was brought up to our attention, we had a roundtable, and it just seemed the most sense that we would withdraw that portion. Again, I regret that we did it that way, but we did, and we've withdrawn it, and we're asking your consideration just solely upon the 5.4 acres. Once we come back with the remaining 11, I think you'll see a completely different plan, and certainly at that point, we would have to ask for split on the property. But I think what we're going to be able to show you at that time is certainly where those access road points are going to be very seamless, so that it's going to provide that connectivity I've also been in contact with the new owner of the property to the west. I think that just closed here just recently. I don't know the exact date, he just gave me a call. And so we will be working, I've worked with him in the past, so we've got a good relationship, and so we will be working, to have the best flow for both of us, knowing that whatever's good for him is gonna be good for me, what's good for me is gonna be good for him.
Thank you, Mr. Forney. That concludes my questions. Just one comment, you just said there would be a totally different kind of proposal for the future use, and that is somewhat the basis of my concern here. But thank you very much for your testimony.
Yes, sir. And what I meant by that, we're gonna be more detailed, because I know that I've heard the comments here this evening, and certainly when we come back, all of those things would be addressed, prospectively. As far as what we're doing here, certainly based on any conditions that you do, we will follow each and every condition to the letter. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to put a couple of questions to the staff again, just to reiterate. The overall issue I'm having is there's a lack of clarity to this application. It makes it very difficult to make a decision, to analyze the proposal, and we know that there is future proposals or proposals, more than one, coming for this acreage. I guess the bottom line, Ms. Root, would you consider this a complete application for this one use?
I think that there are certainly missing pieces of this application, that, we would have liked to have seen submitted as, you know, requested, or maybe we didn't clearly ask for them specifically enough. I think sometimes the applicants think that, well, we'll just take care of this at the time of building permit, which makes it difficult as well. I did place conditions of approval to have those landscape plans revised and to me within either prior to application for the building permits or within 3 months, whichever was first. So that it was not something that drags out or drags down the path here, to find an acceptable plan. The other thing that is still not clear is the corridor plan being overlaid on that. Mr. Franz brought up that the loom still is not shown, which was requested to be shown as well. So, with that, I understand that the future building is, lends some even further, lack of clarity to this application. And upon staff's direction, we said, sure, you can, you know, combine these things and put them together. And then after they made that application and we started to review that drawing, it was like, well, gosh, then now it's the traffic impact study, which could take, you know, in the neighborhood of 3 to 5 months to complete. And that's why they've decided to separate that and bring that forward so that they could potentially get started on this project. So is the application fully complete? The documents and the plans, are they exactly what we'd like to see? No. And would we like to see more detail and clarity? Yes. Can it be conditioned to provide that to us? It can.
Thank you, Ms. Root. Mr. Franz, do you have any comment in addition to that same question?
Yeah, Mr. Henningsammer, the only thing that, probably the most concerning portion of this is the Middleton Road corridor plan, that right of way for the loon or the U-turn opportunity. that's supposed to be placed on the subject property's southern property line is not depicted. I know, Mr. Hatch and myself have been emailing back and forth. He shot some line work over to us in an email, we took a look at it, and, weren't able to see where that right-of-way for the additional U-turn opportunity was located, and we've indicated that, haven't seen anything come back at this point, but the concerning portion to that is there's, a high likelihood that when that gets depicted on the site plan, it will directly impact at least one, if not two, of the buildings. And to me, that's a concern, simply because that could change layouts and modify some things that, may better off be addressed at this point, just so that we can all see and understand what we're looking at.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. And, Ms. Root, on that same point, there's a couple of issues that have essentially modified the site plan during this meeting. The treatment of the northern boundary, landscaping, no landscaping, the lack of a landscaping setback on the southern boundary of the proposal. In your opinion, that'll all have to be redrawn, to meet those conditions, those requirements of the zoning code?
Yeah, essentially, what I see lacking in that, yes, the landscape buffers are not there, but there's no dimensions really on these plans, and so it makes it difficult for us to see what's the distance and spacing between the buildings and what are those roadways and accesses look like, and what are those buffers? Are they actually the appropriate buffer widths that are required? And without knowing where this right-of-way for the Middleton corridor plan to be dedicated we know that this plan is going to change, and so are we looking at what should be the final plan? No, we're not. It can't be. And it's also not clear in the documentation that those would be three-sided structures, and that should be, at the very least, a condition of approval that be clearly stated in the conditions that those would essentially provide the site obscuring wall, if you will, at this point, based on Mr. Hatch's verbal description of those structures, because I don't believe it's spelled out or stated in the application, the proposal letter, or in the drawings that we've seen.
Thank you, Ms. Root. That concludes my questions of staff. I'd allow 5 minutes rebuttal from Mr. Hatch, if you'd care to take that opportunity.
Thank you again for the opportunity to rebuttal.
Sure.
Hearing examiner, I stand before you in kind of a unique position since I did both of the approvals on special use across the street and familiar with the expectations of the city of Caldwell. It appears that the diligence and expectation of this particular application is something that we feel that we need to respond more appropriately to. So for that, I apologize, but I would recommend or propose your consideration to table this application so we can respond to some of the comments that we've heard to today. In particular, we would like to propose a draft of the access agreement, revised site plan that addresses staff's comments as well as the dimensions that engineering staff has requested, updated landscaping plan that more appropriately addresses the city's expectation, narrative that clarifies the intent of the three-sided canopy, the removal of the warehouse from this application for point of clarity, clarifying the hours of operation for the facility, continuing to coordinate and work with engineering staff on the location of the road loom to the south, and and also to clarify and work with staff on, even if it's not required now, but the intent of this future development, should there be a northern, landscape buffer proposed on this development. We feel that clarifying the intent of those items would give you a much more satisfactory level of information to make a more informed and appropriate decision.
Thank you, Mr. Hatch. Take that into consideration. And, with that, I'll close the public testimony of this hearing. And, I think we've discussed this, the details of this, proposal, ad infinitum, and I'd like to apologize to the people in this case who take you so long. But, what I'm seeing here and what is just pointed out by Mr. Hatch is there are a number of issues that are outstanding to have this constitute a complete application. The considerations that I have basically 3 courses of recommendation, approval, denial, or continuance. And I'm still really struggling with that the application itself is a long ways from being complete, and those kind of issues, it's, let's say this were a discrete 5.5 acre parcel, very clearly defined boundaries. We could probably reconcile these issues through conditions of approval to a special use permit. What we have here, though, is a much larger piece of property that this application encumbers, and with a very large degree of uncertainty as to how that will be disposed. And what I'm hearing too is that perhaps the applicant, the owners themselves, are not really fully committed or fully finished with their concepts and proposals for this property. Again, if this were a discrete 5.5 acre property, we could solve these issues through conditioning and things that could be addressed at time of building permits and so forth. But as far as I'm concerned, we have a large chunk of land on this corner. I recommended approval for that annexation. We'd like to, when we annex property, we'd like to understand the proposed uses, the kind of impacts it'll have on the city, have some degree of certainty as to the proposed land uses. And I feel that we're not quite there yet. The applicant chose to not have the fuller, future project included this because of the owners of the traffic impact study. And in fact, they did apologize for not taking that route. But what I do have in front of me here is an application that I find very thin. We specifically, we have not resolved it. Probably for community development, the emergency access proposal, I'm sorry, the cross-access agreement for properties to the west, which is integral to developing the service commercial zoning that we have there. This is a critical use, particularly in the proximity to the airport. We need really good support services to the airport, support services to the residential areas developing around here. So that access across this property, I feel, has to be clearly defined as part of the application itself. We can't wander into future refinements on that. I think that has to be designated as part of this application. so that we can all understand, what shape that's going to take. And it's been my experience, if those kinds of details aren't approached at the first, approval of a land use application, it becomes, very difficult to acquire them for the future application. You know, things happen, lands change hands. You know, the commitment, is really difficult to, secure on a future proposal, and that is the main issue I'm having here, for that one part of this. The other things, the landscaping is incomplete. You know, there's just no clear definition of that, and apparently, what was proposed didn't meet the standards, of the zoning code, development code. We've had, redefinition of the type of storage and meeting, what is proposed, is probably going to, on the site plan itself, going to have to be moved, the whole project moved 5 feet to the north, the defined area, the 5.5 or whatever, 0.5 acres, whatever that may have to be expanded to accommodate, these types of changes. So, the whole thing is in flux, and I do appreciate, Mr. Hatch's, proposal for a continuation of this to address these issues. He very clearly delineated the things that should be fixed and should be part of this application. And I'm also interested in typically, excuse me, I've looked at a lot of these, as a planner, the questions of lighting, landscaping, hours of operation, are paramount to this type of use, because that's all we have to go on to understand how it's going to integrate into the urban environment, and how this use may or may not impact the surrounding landowners. I still left with, it's clear, I'm not looking for an approval at this time. And that leaves me with the decisions of whether to, deny this outright and let them take this to council on appeal, or continue this to a date certain, and look for a complete application, what we consider a complete application. So with that, I think we have enough of an idea of what is going on here. What I want to do is continue this application and get the complete application we hope to have. But what that will have to entail is specifically a clear proposal definition for this cross-access agreement, and what that is going to look like for the entire parcel. We'll treat this, I think it's 16 acres or so. It's still one piece of land, and we have to deal with that piece of land and its dimensions, the way it lays. So to find the ingress, or the cross-access agreement, and what that is going to exactly look like, where it's going to be located, and have some sort of a draft instrument to that effect. Secondly, the landscape plan should be fully in compliance with the COLO standards, and I think this has to, because of the type of use, again, my concern is the shielding from neighbors. I think this, maybe you look at going the extra mile on the landscaping, making it wonderful. We need details on the operation as part of the application, the hours of operation, the kind of staffing we enjoy there, some description of the security measures, just things that reassure that this land use fit into the context of this corner of Caldwell. And the same with the lighting, the clearly defined lighting that does not project onto the surrounding properties, and, the details that go along with that. And I have to go back, there may have been some items missed, but we look at the statement from, Mr. Hatch about the items that do need to be clarified here. And then, the whole idea of the future use, I would like to, go one of two ways on this. Either totally exclude any mention of the future use, any portrayal of it, because it sounds like that's still not defined in your own, planning, or bring that back with the future use, and let's make a coherent, application, including the traffic impact study for that. That would certainly be my preferred, way to approach this project. I know there's time constraints and so forth that you're under, and I'm sure that present difficulties, but the type of application I'd like to see is one for the uses that you've shown as a future use and this existing use, and how they're going to work together in context with the ultimate build out of this property. And we have to really nail these things down, and then the other item is what needs to be done for the Middleton Ustick Road corridors. Have those fully detailed in this application. And I'd like to have these points of interaction with the transportation corridors nailed down in this application, and not leave it for a future application. And I'd like to ask staff, what kind of timeline would we look? Are we looking at would you suggest a 30-day, a 60-day timeline to continue this to a date certain?
So it would depend on, so you left that at two ways to do this. They could bring back just the storage units with addressing the cross access and the corridor plan and the landscaping and that, and or hold off until they get their TIS done and bring back the site plan for the 16 acres and how that looks, is how I understood you to say that. Okay. So that I believe, I guess I would like to understand what Mr. Fernie would prefer on that, because that would make a difference in when we continue this too. You do have 2 dates in July coming up. Some of these things could be probably fairly quickly addressed if they were only under consideration of the storage unit facility itself on the 5 acres. If they're going to hold off and bring the entire application back, then, that they have to have the TIS completed prior to us coming forward with this to the hearing body again. And that means that traffic impact study would have to be completed and reviewed by engineering staff.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to go back to Mr. Fournier. Would you come up, please, and address these issues?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, you need to open the public testimony back up
yes.
for Mr. Fernie.
Okay, yes, I do open up the hearing for further testimony, and request testimony, Mr. Forney, addressing particularly whether you'd like to do the application, complete application for the storage unit use, or secondly, for the future use and this current use. And then that would determine the timeline that we'd establish at this hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Based on a number of factors right now, very much would like to just have the standalone project looked at, meaning the storage, without any future, development at this time. So that would be the preference and the request, to the hearing examiner, that we just address solely, the issues that we will address with, storage.
Mr. Forney, you think you can do that in 30 days?
You do.
Do we have, the staff would have to renotice this or just continue it?
No, we would continue it at this point. The comment from my counterpart here, Mr. Franz, indicated that it would at least need to be the 30 days in order to address the loom issues and the roadway stuff, so. You do have a date of July 27th on the calendar at this point.
Okay, Mr. Forney, what do you think about that date?
We would like to take that date. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you very much for your testimony. With that, I'll close the testimony and proceed. Without much more discussion, we'll continue this hearing to July 27th, 2021. And with that, we'll expect the items that I addressed earlier, the cross-access agreements, the transportation corridor plans, landscaping, hours of operation, lighting, et cetera, will be completed to the satisfaction of staff, and we'll reconvene that hearing July 27th. And with that, I close this hearing. And thank you very much for your participation. And next, we'll open the hearing for case number SUP 2102, request by Rogelio and Tanya Rojas for a special use permit to construct triplex on 0.25 acres in an R2 zone. The property is located on the northeast corner of South Montana Avenue and East Oak Street. And with that, I'd like staff to present their staff report on that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Katie Phillips, Associate Planner, 621 Cleveland Boulevard, and I have been sworn in.
Thank you.
As you indicated, the request is for a triplex. The subject property located at 2119 South Montana Street is zoned R2 medium density residential. The comprehensive plan designation is medium density residential. And a triplex in that zone requires special use permit approval. Initially, when this project was being developed, triplex was permitted use in the medium density residential zone, and by the time the applicant made building permit application, code had changed to require special use permit approval. The parcel is surrounded by a multitude of various types of residential, townhomes, multifamily, single-family, duplexes and triplexes. The project meets or exceeds the density requirement of 10,500 square feet. South Montana is a classified collector roadway, so direct access to the property will be taken from the alley as per the engineering department, and development of this site, staff feels, will be an improvement and, conducive to the area. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. I did have one question, about fencing. Is the project to be fenced?
I will let the applicant speak to that. I am unaware. It's not
Is there a requirement for fencing?
There is not a requirement for fencing.
And, maybe a question better suited for the applicant, that, well, as far as the parking goes, the parking seems, well, I guess the concern I have for is the future residents, they're, like the third house furthest away from the parking lot's gonna kind of have a lot of walking to do with the groceries and stuff. Is there any kind of consideration about parking in the rear of the structure? Is that even allowed?
Parking really is allowed anywhere on a parcel in a designated area that is paved. So if the applicant did desire to, utilize part of the rear of the property as parking, as long as it was paved with asphalt or concrete, that would be their prerogative.
Okay, let's say there was a sidewalk, well, I guess at the front end. I may be worrying too much about this hypothetical resident having to pack their groceries across the snow, to that third unit. Those are all the questions I had. Thank you very much. And, with that, I've asked the applicant, is it proceed? Make your presentation, please.
Thank you. I'm Adam Garcia with Houston Bugach Architects, located at 1301 North 39th Street, Nampa, Idaho. I'm here representing the applicant, the row houses. And as Katie indicated, it is a triplex, single story. The design is cohesive with the surrounding design, which is kind of a mid-century look. We're going for a mid-century modern look. The original purpose of the project is really to go after the student of the College of Idaho. As you guys are aware, they're very low on housing, and so that's really the main purpose of this. Soon we'll be in talks with them and trying to get something established with them for that. To kind of pick on the concern that you had about parking, we did look at that. There just wasn't enough room to do that and to maximize the property. We are completely maxed out with our setbacks for the building, either direction. So this is the best we've done. As Katie indicated, when we first approached this project in 2017, a lot of the requirements weren't required that are required now. One being civil drawings and so on and so forth. We went ahead and did that, and so before we understood that this had to be a special use application, we submitted the package to the building department. So everything you see in front of you has been kind of just approved with some comments that we've addressed already, and have yet to submit it until after this gets resolved. So at this point, you know, we're open for questions on anything you might see that's, you know, an issue, I guess. So but other than that, it's just a simple project, a triplex that, we hope that it's a good investment for the owners.
I think I'll ask you the same question about fencing.
There's an existing fence that's there. Whether it needs to be improved at this point, I'm not sure. But at this point, we would like to keep it there. So there is a fence that divides the two properties. Think there needs to be one on the south or the west property, or just because of the road. But at this point, there should be one that separates the adjacent property. It's kind of hard to see on there.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I'd like to see a good fence there. I would like to, Tom, the site plan design is very well done. I like the setback of the middle unit and, the way that you, have the fence, or the modulation of each unit, and, you know, that makes for a better design, something a little more interesting.
Yeah, and that's the challenge of the triplex. And the owner went as so far as to want to separate the three units with CMU block. to isolate sound and to any kind of destruction between, residents, so, he was very thoughtful in doing that.
Yeah, I appreciate the design, and, I think you've done a good job on that. That concludes, any questions I may have, and, thank you for your testimony.
All right?
And, we'll move on. Mr. Rojas, would you care to testify?
No, it's changed my mind, I think we're good. You didn't trust me.
Okay, good job. Thank you very much. Moving to the, findings of facts, reading, page 3 of the staff report, the Caldwell hearing examiner accepts the facts outlined in the staff report, public testimony, and the evidence list. All adopted city ordinances, standards, and codes were used in evaluating the application. The proposed use conditionally permitted by the terms of the ordinance and is subject to conditions of approval. The conclusions of law. The Caldwell hearing examiner has the authority to hear this case and order that it be approved or denied. The public notice requirements are met, and the hearing was conducted within the guidelines of applicable Idaho code and city ordinances. And the order of decision, based on the findings of fact and conclusions of law, the Caldwell hearing examiner hereby orders that case number SUP 2102, a request by Rogelia and Tony Rojas for a special use permit to construct a triplex located at 2119 South Montana Avenue on parcel R0363 in Caldwell, Idaho, in R2 medium density residential zone is approved with the following conditions of approval. And there are conditions 8.2 through 8.8, and I would like to add at 8.9 that there is a fence on the adjoining property line. And with that, that closes this hearing. Thank you very much. Thank you all for your testimony. Appreciate it. I started talking to him.